Hi, this is Kevin, and today I'd like to talk about SpecFlow. SpecFlow is a test automation framework for writing tests with the Gherkin syntax, and it works with your existing .NET code. It allows developers, testers, and product owners to gain an understanding of what the features of an application are and how well they're tested. Let's take a look.
SpecFlow provides a way for product owners, testers, and developers to get on the same page and understand what the story is. Discussing and writing scenarios between the customers, product owners, and developers is important to identify edge cases and reduce misunderstandings before the start of implementation. So how does SpecFlow work? Basically, you create this text file, called a feature file, in a regular text editor. You type whatever you want in it as long as it follows the Gherkin syntax. So you have the user story written in English. Then each scenario, each given, when, and then is also in English. Then a step definition file is generated in Visual Studio. This is basically a test class in C#. Developers then fill out the step definition class. Optionally, you can create a living document. It is a static HTML file that contains all the features that were defined in a feature file. I will show you a brief example of this later on.
So that's an overview of SpecFlow. Now I'll show you how to set up SpecFlow in Visual Studio.
First, we need to install the SpecFlow extension to Visual Studio. This will make writing the SpecFlow feature files a lot easier. First, open up Visual Studio. On the top, select Extensions, then Manage Extensions. Now, make sure that the Online tab is selected on the left, and then search for SpecFlow. Now select Download. You'll need to close Visual Studio in order to complete the installation of the extension. You should see the VSIX installer for SpecFlow pop up. Select Modify, and then if you see this, you'll know that the modifications are complete. You can go ahead and close. Now, if you open up Visual Studio again, and then you go to Extensions, Manage Extensions, and if you select Installed, you should now see the SpecFlow extension installed for Visual Studio. By the way, in the following examples, I will be using this simple calculator app to show how you can use SpecFlow to write tests. This calculator app can calculate the total purchase of a meal in a restaurant, given the total price, the sales tax, and the number of people in the group. Now let us create a test project and use SpecFlow in those tests. First, right-click on the solution, select Add, and then select New Project. Next, you can either select the SpecFlow project template and create that, or you can create a regular test project and install the SpecFlow tests via NuGet. It doesn't matter. Using the SpecFlow project template just installs the boilerplate SpecFlow files from the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and select the SpecFlow project template and select Next. Then I will specify a project name. In this case, I will use the name calculator app.tests. Then Create. Here I will set the test framework to be MS Tests. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. Then I will click on the Create button. Here you can see that a plain old C# test project has been created. It has the SpecFlow libraries installed. The project is pre-populated with a sample feature file and a sample step definition file. The feature file contains a text scenario at the top and with a list of given, when, and thens. This is the Gherkin syntax. Each given, when, and then is mapped to a corresponding method in the step definition file, which is here. Each method in the step definition file implements the given when then in the feature file. So for example, this given is mapped to this given method in the step definition file. This when method, this when, is mapped to this when method in the step definition file, and so on. Methods throw a pending step exception. This just means that the step has not been implemented yet. And now, when I run all the tests, you can see that it's going to build and run the test scenario that is given in this SpecFlow feature file.
Now I'll show you how to implement a new user story and corresponding scenarios in SpecFlow.
Suppose you have a user story that you'd like to implement with SpecFlow. As a cashier, I would like to calculate the final price of an item so that I can charge the customer correctly. Here's how it could look like if we implemented the user story in the Gherkin syntax. I have the feature name at the top, a brief description of the user story next, and then a given, when, and then. Note that I'm not limited to text in the description section. I could also use the Markdown language to add images and additional formatting if needed. Now let us implement this feature into Visual Studio. First, create a SpecFlow feature file. Go over here, click Add, New Item, and then select Feature File for SpecFlow. Next, give it the name of the feature. Since the name of the feature is Card Purchase, I will name the feature file with the same name. Click Add. Next, I will copy and paste the feature directly into the feature file. Notice that the text of the given, when, and then is purple. This means that the steps are not mapped to a corresponding step definition file. If you have steps that are in white even if there are no corresponding steps in a step definition file, then you might just need to restart Visual Studio to get it all working again. Now I will create the mapping between the given when thens to the step definition file. To do this, right-click on the purple text, select Define Steps, and then this dialog will pop up. Here you can either create a new step definition file with the new given when thens with this file name, or copy the given when thens into the clipboard. Let's create a new step definition file. Click Create. You can see that a new step definition file for the card purchase feature has been created. Now, if you go back to the feature file given, the given when thens are now all in white. Next, I will implement the card purchase feature by putting code into the card purchase step definition file. First, I will add the calculator app as a project reference. Next, I will add the calculator into the step definition file. And then all I have to do now is to fill in the given, when, and then. There. If I've done this correctly, then when I run the tests, then the tests are successful. Now you can see that this test scenario successfully tests this scenario in the Gherkin feature file. Now suppose you have another scenario where you need to add a sales tax. This is how you would implement it in Gherkin. Notice now that instead of the standard given, when, then, you have a given a user who makes an order with a total price of $100 and the sales tax is 10%, when the user attempts to make a purchase, the user should be charged $110. Since the sales tax is new, it's in purple. Let's implement it. Right-click on the purple text, click Define Steps, and this dialog pops up. This time, we will select the Copy to Clipboard option because I just want to copy-paste the new step into the step definition file. Now, I just need to implement it. Now, when I run the test for this feature, the scenario should show up in the Test Explorer. This indicates that the test has been tested successfully. So now we have two tests, this and this. These two tests in the Test Explorer correspond to the two scenarios that we have here in the feature file. Note that we didn't have to use the scenario keyword. We could also use example, and that these two are synonymous. Also note that any numerical values in your Gherkin feature file are automatically converted in the step definition file. Now suppose you had some information that was prevalent in all scenarios in your feature file. In this case, you would add a background and then define a given statement in there. You can add a table in SpecFlow with a list of data. In this example, we are adding a list of credit card fees per credit card, and this data will be passed on in all of the scenarios. Let's implement this in Visual Studio. So back to Visual Studio, I've added the background and the given into the SpecFlow feature file. I've also added two new scenarios to test it. Notice that since there is a new given text, it's in purple. So we need to implement it. So same as before, right-click on the purple text, then select Define Steps, and this dialog shows up again. Now I will select Copy to Clipboard and copy the new given methods into the step definition file. Now all I have to do is to implement it. Notice that the table in the background of the given is defined as a table here in the step definition file. It'll take some work to extract that out. If you're familiar with Microsoft data tables, then the SpecFlow data tables are very similar. Essentially, a table is a list of rows, and each row is an array that contains the values. You just need to iterate through the rows and extract the values. Now I will implement the new givens for when the user pays with a credit card. Okay, I've implemented the given a credit card fee table method by taking the table and iterating through all the rows. For each row, I extract the credit card name and the fee and convert the fee into a double, ignoring the $ sign at the beginning of the string. I've also implemented the given the user pays with a credit card method. Now, if I go back to the feature file, as you can see, all of the scenarios are in white, which means that there is a corresponding mapping to the step definition file. And when I run the tests, they all pass, which means that all of my tests pass, and yeah, we're good. Finally, you might be wondering if you could run multiple tests with the same input and test for the same output multiple times. And the answer is yes, you can. I've created another new scenario called Multiple Simple Price Calculations. And this scenario tests this specific given, when, and then against the examples in this table at the bottom. What this means is this scenario will test all of these examples and then validate it against the final amount. And there you go. They all pass. As you can see, these three scenarios were created, and these three scenarios correspond to these three examples that were executed when it was testing this specific scenario over and over again. Finally, let us create a living document from the SpecFlow feature file. The living document is a static HTML file that contains all of the information in the feature file. It makes it easier for folks to see the feature file and documentation without having to go into Visual Studio. To do this, first open up a command prompt. You can use PowerShell if you prefer. Next, type the following command to install the living document into the .NET CLI. Make sure that you are in the same directory as your solution file. If you see this, then that means that the living doc CLI was successfully installed. After that, go to the location where the binary test DLLs were generated. Next, run this command. Living doc test assembly SpecFlow calculator, and instead you'll need to use living doc test assembly calculator app.tests.dll -t test execution.json. Here, a living doc.html was successfully generated. This is the living documentation that was generated from the SpecFlow feature files. So these are all the scenarios that we looked at earlier, and as you can see, these are all the given when thens are all specified here, 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 and even the background, which we defined earlier, is captured. Notice also that the number of tests, how many failed, are also included. The test results are also included here. In addition, there are additional analytics which show how many scenarios were passed, how many failed, and how many were others. So there's a lot of information here with regards to the tests that were run and the scenarios that were tested. If you have Azure, there is an Azure plugin that you can install which will generate this living document automatically for you.
Well, that's all I've got for SpecFlow. If you like this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a good day and see you soon.